I thought of making a 1 hour presentation on Peter Drucker. His full name is Peter F. Drucker, Peter Ferdinand Drucker, and his contribution to this overall activity of business and management. Peter Drucker has written many books as a freelance writer, right from the early 1950s, about various aspects of management. His earliest book was the book called Concepts of a Corporation. I could not get a copy of that book. Even I was walking through Singapore trying to get a copy, where the Chinese gentleman said, if you wait till tomorrow, I can get one for you. But for good or bad, on that day evening, I was leaving Singapore for Bangalore, so could not lay hands on that book. But definitely, one of the better books written by Peter Ferdinand Drucker, or Peter Drucker, if we would call him for short, is the book called The Practice of Management. Possibly it's written somewhere in 1956. The original edition of this book I happened to see it at the Indian Institute of Management Library, Indian Institute of Management Bangalore Library, somewhere in 2002 when I was searching for some books. Now, what is the legacy of this man called Drucker? What is his contribution? Is something that has to be understood with some kind of depth. I have read many other books of Drucker, but the practice of management will definitely be one of the finest masterpieces of management thinking and management literature, which comes from first hand experience of a young Peter Drucker who was walking through or who was associated with General Motors as an some kind of an observer. And he had the vision, not just the vision, the essence or the stuff or the experience that is very much of a first hand and genuine nature, which would ultimately become this book, The Practice of Management. I've been an avid reader of this book, and I think we should discuss. I should tell you something what I read in this book. Why? Because all practicing managers or any kind of management person associated with business or business led institutions must have some idea of this apart from the training that they get in the schools and colleges and education institutions where they study, where sometimes they definitely come out not maybe understanding some of the more subtle facets of business and management, which is very important even to my observation. If an organization to sustain in the field of its operation for a long time, to that extent, Peter Drucker has made a great contribution to mankind, if you would like to say, in doing a great service by writing and publishing it as a book so that people could read and have a look at it. I think I laid hands on this book, The Practice of Management, at the Indian Institute of Science Library, maybe some 25 years ago. And ever since I was hooked to that book, that shows there's managerial thinking in me, or a management man in me, because I enjoy that book to a large extent. All that Drucker wrote in this book may not be applicable or practical. Nonetheless, nonetheless, it definitely forms some kind of a bedrock or a basis around which the activity of management to some extent could be scripted. There is some kind of a recipe or some kind of solution for the various problems generally organizations undergo to understand very late where they were wrong, especially in the activity of management and in the selection of managers. Peter Drucker had the temerity to define business as a very different kind of an entity, definitely different from the other kinds of activities that we human beings entreat ourselves to. First of all, he calls management as an organ of business, which was never before understood by many people. He defines management as an organ of business. Now, I think I would go step by step, hopefully trying to do justice to what Drucker has done. Read, I would enjoin many of you to read that book, The Practice of Management, Peter Ferd and Drucker, because it really, whenever I used to talk at certain conferences, I used to always quote Drucker. Before you do any work, any person must have a scholastic understanding of that work. A general in the military has a scholastic understanding of warfare. It's not just an action understanding. If something is not working, he understands from a very academic viewpoint why something is going wrong and takes the necessary strategies to correct the course of things. Without wasting much time, I would just go into what Tucker talks about business. Somewhere Drucker says, what are the two most important activities of a business? But he says, what is business? One of the primary jobs of a business is to create a customer. It's not just servicing a customer. I have to create a customer. Now, what a different world we would have if we were to follow this in our day-to-day, what we call activity of commerce and business. How do we create a customer? How can a hotel create a customer? For this process, Peter Drucker says business has got two most important drivers. He says without hesitation, they are marketing and innovation. If I were to add one more point to that, it would be also operations. Marketing, innovation, and operations would definitely be the three pillars on which any business activity stands. And in these three activities, marketing somewhere is the most important, supported by innovation, constant innovation, and then have what we call, as a result of which we have got operations. Innovation is not innovation. How do we define innovation in a business sense? It is not necessarily inventing anything new. Innovation would mean trying to do something in a better way. Any business institution must focus on these three activities in the way it appraises its employees, in the way it conducts its work, so that it can stay in business secure and for a long period of time. Now, what is this activity called management? Now, somewhere we have defined what's a business. Take the best example of creating a customer. It would definitely be the earliest example of such an event or situation would be Henry Ford. What did Henry Ford do? Henry Ford made a Model T, made a quadricycle to start with, and ultimately the Model T car, in an era when no one thought that something called as a car, was a possibility. Definitely, Henry Ford has created a large number of customers for a product which was hitherto unknown, and did all the innovative activities that need to go with it to make the entire activity of selling, servicing, and usage of cars a very happening thing. I was listening to a series of television serials about the United States, and someone was making a point. It was Henry Ford and his invention of Model T that transformed the entire landscape of the United States. Henry Ford was sometimes even unhappy over it later in his life when someone said that because of you, people are leaving villages very easily and coming into cities. Henry Ford was upset that the rustic values through which he came may no longer exist in the future. Definitely, Henry Ford did activities of marketing, activities of innovation, and activities of production. The three important cornerstones of any business. But the greatness of Henry Ford is that he created customers, not one customer, he created a large number of customers. There were no petrol stations in the past. Henry Ford said petrol stations can be every and made a viable business. But where did Henry Ford falter is a very nice question around which Peter Drucker talks to a large extent in what is called the Ford story. Please understand, management is a practice. According to Drucker. And what do we mean by this word called practice? It's what a doctor does. He practices. He, whenever I say management and the practice of management, I talk of ethics in the way I work. There is no other work in the world that is to some extent ethics centered. And it is a practice. Practice means it's a day to day affair I enter into. And one of the activities of, there are various activities of management. And I am taking various kinds of decisions from time to time based on various inputs that come into me. And that is what I call as a practice. Now, what happens is a very nice, what happens, why do I need an organ called as management? Definitely comes from the story on which Henry Ford operated. We never had large manufacturing of the scale of the motor vehicle industry, of the car industry, before 1908 or 1906, when Henry Ford started making, mass producing what we call as Model T cars. People were hooked onto it. People started enjoying riding it, and people started using it to go to work. They could span large distances. That's because of the car. They no longer depend on the railroad, or they no longer need to depend upon the horses. And I had a rugged vehicle, very well designed and innovated, which I could use to move from one place to another place. But what started as a Ford plant would have made, we made 100 Ford Model T cars a day. It landed up, obviously, it landed up making thousands per day as the demand for these cars began to peak. This is where I suddenly, to a stuff, immediately, to a large extent, suddenly, I found the demand for this word called management. Henry Ford understood entrepreneurship. Henry Ford never understood what is management because he was not a very highly schooled man. Today, the word called management was not understood by Henry Ford, which with disastrous consequences with time. Henry Ford was a very good entrepreneur. The mistake in later years, what he did, according to Peter Drucker, is that he tried to run a large corporation entrepreneurially with serious side effects and what we call mishaps. Now, how did the Ford Motor Company work? According to Peter Drucker, every decisions was centralized around Ford. Ford took pride in paying $7 a day for its workers. People from villages started coming towards Detroit, standing outside the plants of Detroit, of Ford Motor Company, willing to be employed inside his factory at $7 a day, which is even by today's standards a fairly high payment in many various countries. It's 700 rupees a day, roughly. That translates in to 20,000 rupees a month, roughly, even by modern standards. So you can imagine in 1908 or 1910 or 1915, Henry Ford took the most hard-working employees, maybe removed people who are not doing the right kind of work. For the first time in the history of the American continent, all kinds of American citizens came together in the making of the motor car. Such kind of experiences and such kind of workstations and such kind of experience and activity, more precisely said, helped in wartime manufacturing of America, of the United States during the Second World War, when huge amount of ammunition were mass produced for the Allies by the American continent. The learning and the expertise and it's not just expertise and the verb, if you might use that word, came from the manufacturer of motor cars because they know that we can mass produce. But look at the organization culture inside Ford Motor Company. It was driven largely by fear of unemployment, centralized control by Henry Ford, few of his henchmen who went around the plant trying to get people to work very hard, no decentralization of decision making, not a very healthy working atmosphere, though successful as a business. By 1925 or 1930, I think the emergence of a company like General Motors saw that to the first time the need for more professional approach in the way people are handled. What was this consequence of this absolute lack of management in Henry Ford's company was that obviously there was mismanagement of information, misrepresentation of information, miscarriage of information, wrong kinds of decisions possibly being taken. And I've got a plethora of problems which slowly began to mount with time and made Henry Ford aghast. And many of the wrong kind of decisions that Ford took later in life with regards to his activities of business can be traced to such kind of a managerial culture, the pressures of which even he began to increasingly fall on his son, Edsel, and resulting in various kinds of confusion and chaos. The growth of General Motors gave, for the first time, the confidence which Henry Ford had was possibly shaken. And he never understood what was happening because he was not a very highly schooled man. He understood engineering, he understood tooling, he understood manufacturing. He never understood the word management beyond some of his horizons. The growth of General Motors, uh, he says, who Peter Drucker says, put a sudden brake on Henry Ford's activities. Henry Ford had to retool his plant, and then some of the good employees of Ford Motor Company found easy entry into General Motors because of the experience. General Motors was most probably run at the point of time by Alfred P. Sloan, who was a college graduate, uh, one of the earliest business graduates. And with a man like Alfred P. Sloan, General Motors started nudging into prominence. Alfred P. Sloan had definitely an idea of management. He did not work in an entrepreneurial way. He hired people to manage various divisions and gave them decentralization and autonomy to operate in the way they thought was fitting. But for the first time in the history of the world, the need for management was understood, forcing Henry Ford to, I think, to step down, and some of his, I think, his grandson taking over and rescuing the organization, which is a very important page in the history of business. Now, what was the problem with Ford's company? The spirit of the organization, which Peter Drucker says was not right. Though they were running the business very well. Peter Drucker says an organization must create the right spirit. It's only the right kind of spirit that people will go out of the way to do the right kind of work of innovate to market and manufacture. And it's the duty of management per se to create the right kind of spirit. No one used this word so far. I appreciate Drucker because he had the courage to to coin this phrase called the spirit of an organization. I give him full credit for making such a chapter or such a statement and explaining what it is. Now, how can I create the right kind of spirit? Peter Drucker says you must always concentrate on the abilities of a person and not on his disabilities. It definitely comes into modern day HR. If I focus on the disabilities of a person, I am creating a wrong spirit in an organization. I am trying to focus on his abilities and try to make use of his abilities for the best of the organization. And it's not focused on disabilities. If I have got a culture of focusing on disabilities, I'm ending in the activity of ruining people and at the end of the day ruining the enterprise. A very well nice statement by Peter Drucker. Now, how to create the right kind of spirit in an organization? Peter Drucker says the way you select your managers. Peter Drucker says a very nice statement. Leadership is exercised through character. It's not relevant to what we are doing right. What I'm saying right now, it is through character that leadership is exercised. Peter Drucker says it is through integrity that the activity called management is exercised. Let me make this statement very clear. If I select wrong kind of managers in the organization, they will ruin the spirit of the organization. If I ruin the spirit of the organization, it damages people and ultimately damages the organization. That is what Peter Drucker is trying to say. How do I create the right spirit? I focus on the abilities of people, not the disabilities. To have such a kind of a system or an environment or a dispensation, I must be careful about the kind of people I choose into management. When I choose people into management, integrity is more important than intelligence. Peter Drucker, if I try to quote him, if I don't remember it perfectly well, he says, what is integrity cannot be clearly defined. What amounts to lack of integrity of a serious nature is not very difficult to identify. It is through integrity that a manager works. If he lacks in integrity, he ruins people, he ruins processes, and he ruins people and he ruins the organization through his actions. So he says integrity is not something that we compromised in the way a management operates, the way a management man operates. Whom not to appoint to management jobs? Whom not to appoint to management jobs? If a man was seriously deviant in the issue of integrity, then he must not be appointed, or he must not be given a management job, or he must not be put in charge of others, is what he is trying to say. He says, never appoint a man to a management job who is afraid of strong subordinates. Never appoint a man to a management job who tries to find out who is right instead of what is right. And never appoint a man onto a management post. Very important statement what he says, who focuses more on the weaknesses of people than on their abilities. The job of a management man is to strengthen the strengths of people, not to focus on the weakness of a person. See, I've made four characteristics. According to me, if I were to sum up everything that Peter Drucker did during his career as a management consultant, this is the most important contribution what he has done. Go to any organization and see people who manage and who are put in charge of other people. He ruins if he is not a man of integrity. I will repeat this again because this needs to be emphasized, reiterated, emboldened, displayed, shouted from the tops of all corporates, so that corporates do not over and over again make mistake in the way they operate. Four rules around which Peter Drucker says the management man must be judged. Point number one, he must not be a man of absolute lack of integrity. He must be a man of integrity. And I will continue on that. Integrity is more important than intelligence. He says a management man can be pardoned for bad behavior, lack of etiquette, lack of anything. He can be pardoned for anything. But if he lacks in integrity, he ruins people. The most important building block of an organization. I want to shout this so that the whole world can listen to what I'm saying. Thanks, there is a medium like this today. So Peter Drucker says that statement first. Peter Drucker says, never appoint a man on a man. Second point, never appoint a man on a management job whose focus is on the weaknesses of people and not on their strengths. If you focus on the weaknesses of people, I've got an organization who creates a poor spirit. So don't appoint such a man to a managerial post. Or be careful that you be careful if a person is working in that way. Never appoint a man to a management post who is afraid of strong subordinates. Andrew Carnegie was once a steel magnate in the United States. And he was asked, what's your biggest strength? He says, I would like this to be written on my epitaph. Here lies a man who knew to recruit into his service men who are smarter than himself. And he moved along with them. This is one of the case of a management man par excellence. Please see this one called Andrew Carnegie. I think he was associated with the steel industry. The greatness of Andrew Carnegie is the ability to hire people who are smarter than him. That means he was not afraid of strong subordinates and make use of them at their work. Fourth point, never appoint a man to a management job who always focuses on who is right instead of what is right. He is trying to fix blame on people and not trying to remedy or correct the situation in which he is. I think these four lines is the biggest contribution of Peter Drucker to the entire generations of mankind, because no one, to the best of my knowledge, had the courage or the wit or the farsightedness to make these four statements. Drucker is immortal because of that. What amounts to lack of integrity of its seriousness is not difficult to find, and employees will very quickly understand if a man is not got integrity. And if a man does not have integrity, he ruins people, the most important building blocks of an organization. I think every B school must write this. Every school, any kind of education establishment, what they saw, must write these statements because they have some essence in it. They have some strength in it. They have a message in it more than anything else. So I was telling you that the importance of creating the right kind of spirit in an organization. Spirit comes from our focus on the strengths of people and not their weaknesses. If I have to focus on strengths on people, I have to appoint. I need to appoint people who are got who can be defined as managers. Management is an organ of business, and your organization can never the right kind of spirit if you will end up recruiting wrong kind of people to occupy managerial posts. Because if you appoint the wrong kind of person, he will ruin the spirit of the organization. He will ruin the organization per se. Now, this economy. This is the most important message that Peter Drucker has. Most important contribution of Peter Drucker. I will repeat these words again, these lines again, because they are very dear to my heart. Point number one: what amounts to a lack of integrity? Never appoint a man to management. In the practice of management, character is more important than intelligence. What amounts to lack of integrity is not very difficult of a serious nature, is not very difficult to define. Employees can understand very soon if a man lacks in integrity. If he lacks in integrity, he ruins people. The most important building blocks of an organization. And he ruins the organization thereby. And never appoint a man to a management job whose focus is on the weakness of people and not on their strengths. Never appoint a man on a management job who always looks for who is right instead of what is right. Never appoint a man on a management job who is afraid of strong subordinates. I don't know if translate to 4 or 5 points. I'm not talking the word leadership, but many of the management people slowly move to the activity called leadership. A leader manages without managing, just by his actions. He does not take a pen and say what all has to be managed. That is not leadership, but leader is a manager. A leader is a man, has to be a man of character, because it's through character that leadership is exercised. A leader makes human beings perform even without managing them. Through his actions as a person, he sets an example and makes others follow it, leading to the development of people and to the development of an organization. Now, I have made these statements and I've emphasized them. And let us go to something else, that what Peter Drucker has to say about the entire spectrum of what we call as management. He talks about the fallacy of the one-man chief executive. I don't know. He has, I think, even in India, we have tried these experiments of power sharing of the chief executive's post, and it has not been very successful. What Peter Drucker feels somewhere is that a one-man chief executive is a fallacy. And sometimes it's difficult for him to work because even he has got just 24 hours of time like everyone else. And the work that he undertakes is so complex that sometimes the job has to be divided among a couple of people, all of whom who work together with almost equal powers, handling the various aspects of the organization. I think Azim Premji is a big fan of Wipro, is a big fan of Peter Drucker, and he implements, I think he's successful because of his affiliation with the concepts and ideals of Peter Drucker. In 96, I used to do a project with Wipro Fluid Power in Pina industrial area. Sunil Rajagopalan was from a product of IIM Calcutta, was the international business manager there. Suresh Chandranath was the head of the information technology division. I had some 8 months or nearly a year of active involvement with Wipro Fluid Power. And one day I happened to see an application form of Wipro Fluid Power. On the first page are these lines: what amounts to lack of integrity is not difficult to define. It is through integrity that the management operates, on the very first line. And Peter Drucker and Azim Premji, also Mr. Azim Premji, also tried this chief executive of dividing the chief executive job into 2 3 people. I don't think that experiment worked very well. It might work well in family run companies where a couple of brothers are act as co-chief executives. But I don't know what is exactly is his experience. But this is what Drucker feels. Please understand, there's an area called a chief executive. There can be too much of pressure and information overload, which could affect the way the man works. So he needs to delegate his authority to a more larger number of people who work together as chief executive, so that they operate in unison. And the one-man chief executive is a fallacy because his job is too complicated for one man to handle. Well, if you are a chairman of the board of some company or heading the board, and you find your chief executive falters or is not able to carry out his duties the way it must be done, please see this. If this work is too much cumbersome or burdensome, or it's an overload for chief executive because he needs help so that he does what he should be doing. Somewhere Peter Drucker classifies people as a thinking man and the action man or something like that. He says all these 3 functions are a part of the chief executive's job, and the one man cannot execute that work, and he needs the support of other people and other kind of skills. Now, I think I have touched upon some of these activities that Henry Ford said, but let me come to the next most important thing, what Peter Drucker says. I'm sorry, I use the word Henry Ford. Peter Drucker says, Peter Ferdinand Drucker. To me, it is very important. He defines a class of people who are called as professional employees. What is a professional employee? See, we understand labor and we make the mistake, according to Peter Drucker, in the way we handle a professional employee. He defines a professional employee as an employee whose focus is on becoming an expert in some subject or field and not just doing day to day work. A chartered accountant is a professional employee, doctor is a professional employee. Increasingly today, all this work is coming down into the zone of labor. I have got various friends because a professional employee has to be time because he wants to become an expert in some field. He must not be directed and controlled. That is what Peter Drucker says. He must be given the freedom to do what he wants, and help him becoming an expert in whatever area or field that he thinks he wants to build his expertise. Now, this is a matter of serious concern because I find such kind of people are sometimes not handled well in the organizational context. I will repeat again, a professional employee is different from labor. In the activity of management, a professional employee is the person who tries to become an expert in some field, and he behaves that way, not just doing work, with the focus of becoming an expert. And if you command and control him and push him around and treat him as labor, you are doing a professional employee whose logical contribution to the organization could be to a large extent tapped very well for the future of the enterprise. Even somewhere Drucker says the possibility of putting such employees on the board. It is nice to have one professional employee who has been an expert in some area on the board, in the composition of the board, because he can give a finer view, not a finer view, a right kind of view on certain matters, though he may not have been an expert at that area. But he has got expertise in some other area, and his expertise in that area can be used or might come handy in analyzing or studying various kinds of situations that sometimes the organization might be. But he must not be directed and controlled is a very important aspect. What it's a big contribution that Peter Drucker has made in the way we handle and manage people. If we go to an organization, I might be having a financial expert who's trying to become an expert in the stock market. He's trying to do risk analysis. He's trying to understand the various aspects of risk analysis as an employee. If you make the mistake of directing and controlling him and treating him like labor, you will lose a man who could do risk analysis, which is an important component which organizations work. This is one of the takes of what Peter Tucker has said about professional employment. Now, these are all some of the aspects of what we call that Peter Tucker has talked in his book. First of all, he says management is an organ. It has to be treated as an organ of business. I'll be failing if I don't speak for a few minutes on what is called as management by objectives. Peter Drucker is largely known for it. But let me make one more statement. Under this is some very important aspects. Uh, what is this activity called management by objectives? In this called as MBO. He says in a management system or an organized system, managers must create their own objectives which are to be achieved. I think the Indian administrative service as it works today in India is unfortunately going into the zone of management of objectives. Uh, I was listening to a lecture at the National Law School of India University by Mr. Nagaraj. He was teaching at the court systems of India. Then he made a suggestion in that the BJP government is tough on bureaucrats. They have objectives set, management by objectives, and they are measured around their ability to meet these objectives. Management by objectives. Uh, yes. I think the BJP government is slightly strict. I don't know how it is now after this COVID crisis, but before the COVID crisis, I used to attend classes at the National Law School. It was a very interesting experience. A large hall. I think it's called the Krishnapa Hall. And I used to get into various kinds of interactions with Mr. Nagaraj. Mr. Nagaraj is one of the finest faculty of National Law School, I must say that. He has earlier, when I was doing my Masters of Business Law program at the National Law School, he has taught me industrial relations. That's more than 10 years ago, and he did a good job teaching that. Now he was teaching me the court systems of in India. That means what government of India is trying to do is it is putting objectives on bureaucrats and ask them to achieve it. I don't know if you successfully fail at achieving those objectives. Peter Drucker, he says that you may have to remove someone from work for his successive inability to meet objectives. You should not fire people left or right, but he's simply not able to meet objectives that are put. How are objectives created? Objectives are created, he says, by discussion between the senior and the junior person. And the senior person must facilitate the creation of objectives. Facilitate the creation of objectives and help people to achieve them. In case he repeatedly fails, but he says don't remove people left and right. Any person who has given valuable service to an organization, his loyalty must be respected. And you should not remove him just like. He gives an example of a foreman, one of the companies. Though he never rose in the ranks of the organization to a during his 30 years or 25 years of span, when he left his work, because he had trained scores of people, the skill that man had was training. You must not land up giving a person wrong kind of objectives. I think he was removed from work for some reason because of his inability to meet objectives, because he was given wrong objectives. And after he left, they could understand the huge lacuna of training in the absence of that man. And he was called back, I think, to continue his work, or is given a reward for the work that is done, because the what we call the benefits of the work that he did could only be meted and understood when he was no longer doing his work at that place. Because though he was not a very senior man at that organization, he had trained many people, willingly gave his experience and learning without any binds to people who needed it. So management objective does not mean you should fire people left and right, but you must set up certain objectives within an organization along the managerial hierarchy, and the man must be meted for his ability to achieve them. It's also what creates the right kind of spirit of an organization. What Drucker says is his greatness is his ability and his what we call his temerity, if you want to use that word, or his farsightedness, to coin this phrase called spirit of an organization. If you fire people left or right from an organization, it is definitely not going to bring the right kind of spirit. But if a man is found to be very, very weak in the achievement of certain objectives, he must be removed. Because the organization has to do that. Consider the people who have been making achievements. It would be injustice to people who make achievements. People who are not at all making achievements on report. I think this is an important aspect of organizational theory. Sometimes you might land up making the wrong kind of judgment in this case. My father was not a bureaucrat. My father was an industrial employee, a very highly achieving one. He was in manufacturing of uniselectors, multi-selectors of the Strauger exchange system in the Indian telephone industries in Bangalore, a job which my father did with distinction for nearly 30 years. Strauger was replaced by crossbar and then electronic shift, but my father definitely did a great work with the Strauger system, because when I walked through the Indian telephone industries as a trainee, I got a steady respect for my father. He was very good at doing that work. We survived in the city of Bangalore because of the integrity, and the commitment, uh, and the consistency. My father had both towards the workplace and to the family. He was a highly performing man. He performed. Sometimes I falter in the overall domain of performance because somewhere I am a professional employee. I am always equipped or in the business of understanding knowledge and trying to become an expert in some field. Returns of it might come in the future. Now, these are the kinds of, but it's very important to understand management objectives. I mean, management objective does not say to remove a man. Sometimes around the world, this word is sometimes misunderstood. Management objectives. At various places, they have left removed employees left and right. Some young person of the 20s or 30s who comes as a chief executive after graduating from very powerful business schools. He goes by what he has learned somewhere. Someone said, okay, let us use management by objectives and give everyone objectives. He creates a flood, and then he has the power to remove many people. He removes them only to understand later that he himself gets removed. The organization sometimes have to take the job of removing him at the earliest because he's mismanaging by objectives. Management objective does not say that you should make very stringent objectives, but you must have certain objectives on meet over a period of time. You must also help people to achieve those objectives. But if a person is so weak that he successively fails in achieving his objectives, but if the spirit of the organization dictates will he achieve his objectives or not, that is also to be said. If Indian government wants its bureaucrats to perform, they must be sure that they give them the right kind of conditions, right kind of environment, the right kind of spirit. The government must ensure that. Otherwise, how much ever it's like flogging a dead horse. I think we are doing a good job. Our bureaucrats do a good job. And we do have a fairly good system in place. Now, I've told you something about management by objectives, but you must remove employees. People person who's not is too weak because you owe the organization sometimes the decision. But a man who has done years of service, faithful service, you must be careful when you take any action on that person. These are two extremes that have to be balanced. You must not land up making a mistake. Now, well, this is the essence of what Drucker has said. I also made a mention. Now, ultimately, management is one of the activities of management is to understand people and what they're up to, give them the right kind of spirit and hierarchy, so that they will perform. Have to build the right kind of structure in an organization. How do I write this kind of structure? I build a right kind of structure. I must first of all study the age of a person and his skill, and then I have to balance it in some way in the way I create an organizational structure. An organizational structure must be created so that it performs. I have a combination of age and skill. I must study the structure. If I've got a very lopsided organizational structure, again, that will create the wrong kind of spirit in an organization. If I'm recruiting someone who is of an advanced age and with certain kind of skills, I must give him the kind of position that is he's worthy of. Otherwise, I don't create the right kind of spirit in an organization. Sometimes the politics gets in. If I have too much of politics, it will create a wrong spirit of an organization. Too much of politics will result in the ruin of an organization. It has to be remedied before it's too late. Well, today most organizations, without spending too much of time into thinking about all these, they go strictly by the educational backgrounds of people and then have certain kind of educational qualifications fixed for certain kinds of jobs, And irrespective of the age, they fit people into these jobs. Sometimes the spirit of that organization is not very good to my understanding. It sometimes creates the wrong kind of spirit with people not feeling like working, coming to work every day. They get upset no matter what objectives you give them, they will try to evade it by other kinds of dynamics. Other kinds of dynamics is avoid, bypass, confuse, or delay. They will start using the ABCD strategies because of such kind of. But at the end of the day, we need to create some kind of a system. What if I strictly go by educational background of people? It is an administrative setup. In business, I don't know how much of an administrative setup would, at the end of the day, help in full measure. But there are many organizations, to the best of my knowledge, who work with the administrative setup to an advantage. Some people who don't fit in that kind of administrative, who are the kind of achievers, who are the kind of people who are adventurous, they might sometimes land up being excluded, though they are very high performers who would have loved to do great performance with the organization. But no one is bothered about that because they simply do not have that kind of pedigree according to the administrator to hold a certain kind of an occupation. Now, I've discussed various things that Drucker has said. Finally, Drucker talks of corporate social responsibility to some extent, responsibility of business to society. Any business institution must not act in any way that is detrimental to the social systems around which it operates, because business exists and thrives taking inputs from society, and it has to give back the right kinds of outputs into society in various forms, so that the business in turn thrives. It is a cycle. I am drawing men, material resources from society into a business institution, creating products and services for profit, pumping them back into society at large. And this exchange must be a very honorable one, with nothing malified. And the various kinds of surpluses that this activity of business might create must be distributed again into the community around, so that it can land up into the development of people and processes and systems. And that is also one of the core responsibilities of managers and management and business as a whole. If this cycle of is not properly maintained or executed or understood or implemented, a business institution fails, and its strategic posture and its survival over a long period might sometimes be in question. So I think to a large extent I've talked about Drucker. I hope I could summarize what I talked. I think I do not have time. But I have touched upon some things I hope I could have read. Now I don't read the book fully as I did it before. There's so many other aspects that Tucker has talked. But what I have told you so far through this lecture, I hope every business school in the world would play my video to students at least once, so that some of the finer tenets, some of the intrinsic aspects of management were generally not taught in B schools are laid down very strictly in front of them. So tomorrow when they go to work, you understand that they don't know mistake. If they're working with the wrong kind of management, man, they must understand much before. Appointing a wrong management man is a very serious error any organization can do, and that organization can never be pardoned for putting a man without integrity on a managerial job. is my conclusion. Again, I'll make the statement: no organization can be pardoned by putting a man without integrity on a management job. That organization can never be pardoned because the organization never understands what's management. And I want no, but the organization will not make such mistakes in the way they select and implement managerial work and management people.